If you've ever wondered about mystery blood sugar spikes when you're stressed out or trouble getting a correction to work during times of stress, this video is for you because we're going to break down how stress and stress-related hormones impact our blood sugar level, and this knowledge may explain to you why it feels like such a mystery. I personally really struggle with stress-related blood sugar spikes, and it's something I've seen throughout my life. I can think of countless examples, scary roller coasters. I went ziplining once. My blood sugar was 100 flat, and I got off the zip line with a blood sugar of 300. It took a little while to get through it, but that was a massive spike because I'm scared of heights. I can think of stress related to exams. I would have high blood sugars as I got closer to my big exams in medical school, or like higher baseline blood sugar, so it might be 150 all the time instead of lower. And I would do all these things, take all this extra insulin, eat really carefully calculated meals, study with my flashcards on the elliptical at the gym, trying to get it to move, and it wouldn't move until I would walk out of the test and I could just see the graph come down. It's amazing how much stress can impact blood sugar. And so what we'll talk about today is what happens, what causes this, and what can we do about it? If you don't know me, I'm Dr. Hannah, and I've had diabetes for 20 years. I've been a doctor for about 6 years now. And I have a background in lifestyle medicine, and I'm really obsessed with how our habits and our choices and the way that we set up our life impact our overall health, our energy today, and how we can reduce our risk of chronic disease in the future. And what's so amazing is there's a lot of great data out there about it. I want to start by talking about the hormone cortisol. You may have heard this hormone, and it's a good hormone for our body. It's a hormone that peaks in the morning and kind of decreases over time and is lowest when we're going to sleep. And the idea of cortisol is that it helps us with our blood pressure. It helps us have that feeling of awakeness in the morning, thus the tired sensation before we go to bed. Cortisol is really important, but what can happen when we're under extended periods of chronic stress is that we get an increased baseline cortisol. Cortisol does a couple things for our body. It dumps sugar from our liver into our bloodstream. And so cortisol impacts our blood sugar in two ways. One way is it actually can cause dumping of glucose stores in our liver into our bloodstream, hence the glucose spike. And two, it can cause our tissues to become more resistant to insulin, meaning it doesn't listen to the insulin as well. We need more insulin to move the same amount of glucose out of our bloodstream. And these are the things that impact type 1 diabetes the most, is that one, it can actually put sugar in our bloodstream, and two, it makes our insulin less effective. And so for me, what I find is most useful is understanding that there are times where I may need to bolus for cortisol spikes or stress hormone related blood sugar spikes. And there are also times where I may need to increase my blood sugar correction with insulin in order to be effective. So during times of stress, for example, that week leading up to the board exams, I found that when my blood sugar was 200 flat, instead of needing 2 units to come down to 100 or so, I might need 4 units to come down to 100 or so because I had that insulin resistance in play. And understanding that makes it less confusing and feel less mysterious. The example of the ziplining when my blood sugar spiked up from 100 to 300 because I was so scared, that is something that I had to correct for. I had to take insulin for. Now, understanding that in that example for me, after the way that cortisol and other fight or flight nervous system hormones like norepinephrine and epinephrine impact our blood sugar is quickly. It's almost like over treating a low with just juice. So what we can see is these spikes can come up and come down rather quickly as well. So I didn't have a lot of insulin resistance after I got off of the zip line. In fact, a regular correction brought me down quite quickly. And it's helpful to understand that and learn your body and work with your diabetes doctor so that you can understand how to navigate these symptoms better. It doesn't have to feel so mysterious. Now that being said, there will always be mystery in our blood sugars. And that's something I've really had to come to peace with, that after acceptance of has helped me feel better about my diabetes. One of my favorite endocrinologist, Dr. Stephen Ponder, talks about how if diabetes goes about 50% of what he expects it to go every day, that's a win for him. And he taught me this, and I think it's so interesting because his blood sugars are phenomenal and have been for years, but also he's one of the most knowledgeable people about type 1 diabetes that I know. And so understanding that mysteries, understanding that we can learn so much about biology and biochemistry and how it works and these negative feedback loops, but we may not always know. We can't always understand what's happening in our body. And if you've had diabetes for a little while, you probably already know that it's not just one variable at a time. We've got a little bit of stress going on, plus a little bit of exercise, and maybe we're slightly dehydrated, and maybe we had a different breakfast than we've never bolused for before, and we want to blame it on stress, but it could have been carb counting, or it could have been the hydration, and there are all these layers, and we often don't have to know to have good blood sugars or blood sugars that feel balanced and good to us, because the reaction to what we do to the blood sugar is the most important thing. We don't necessarily have to understand where it came from in order to be able to treat it in a way that brings us back to balance as soon as possible. And that's the takeaway here, because trying to become a detective and get to the bottom of this mystery during a time of stress is not always the best thing for us. I think that working on stress related activities are good. Some of my favorite tools for reducing stress are deep breathing, specifically the box breathing, and you can look this up. There are a million videos about it, but it's where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds at the top, exhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds at the bottom, and you can repeat that 10 times, increasing the length of the time that you're holding it safely. And what it does is reset your nervous system and decrease that fight or flight sympathetic response. Another great thing that works very well for me is meditation. It's a practice, it's something that I had to learn, but just 10 minutes of meditation can put me in a different state where I feel like I see differences in my blood sugar. Walking is my favorite thing to do when I'm stressed. Taking my dogs on a walk or going on a walk by myself in nature really makes a difference, and it impacts my blood sugars so well and kind of helps me walk off the stress and get that insulin resistance back. Those are probably my 3 favorite things that I can do by myself in the moment. Another 2 areas I want to talk about cortisol impacting: digestion and hormones. When we know that we're in that fight or flight state, when we have higher cortisol and other sympathetic hormones like the epinephrine or norepinephrine, our body is thinking fight or flight. It's thinking about getting to a safer place, and it's not prioritizing our energy from our cells going towards digestion. And what can happen is we digest our food at a different rate, which can make our blood sugar less predictable. And that's helpful to understand. It doesn't change the way that I navigate eating around stress. It just makes me understand that if there's something I don't get as far as digesting differently when I'm stressed out, it's likely coming from the stress piece. It will likely resolve when I move past it. The second thing is hormones. And it is so important to understand that when our body is in a state of chronic high stress, so when we're seeing elevated cortisol for weeks and weeks in a row, what can happen is it impacts our other hormones, specifically female hormones, estrogen, progesterone. And what we see is that our hormone cascade, so this biochemistry cycle that we see for hormone creation in our body, you may have heard that times of stress, some women will lose their periods. This is a part of that mechanism. But what's helpful to understand is that chronic stress can also lead to chronic female hormone imbalance, making times like our luteal phase, that 2 weeks, 10 days before our cycle starts, really challenging on our blood sugar. Now, we can see changes in our insulin needs without a doubt, regardless of higher stress throughout the cycle time, but stress makes it so much harder, and that's something to understand. So if you're experiencing that, working with a doctor, absolutely the best thing to do, but also understanding that working on our stress as we try to impact our female hormones is really helpful. And I don't think people understand how much stress impacts our female hormones. It's very clear in biochemistry, but if we're chronically stressed, it's hard to get our female hormones balanced. If we treat the stress first and then look at what's left of the female hormone imbalance to really navigate through, that seems to be helpful for a lot of people. And now what I found from a female hormones perspective, digestion perspective, and also stress management perspective is that doing it in the moment is way less effective than preventing chronic stress or preventing stress response. Now, it may be hard for me to prevent the fact that I'm going to get scared when I go on a tall roller coaster and see changes in my blood sugar that happen in the moment, but it's a lot easier to prevent chronic stress. If you're constantly anxious in your job or your relationship or about something in your life, about the fact that you have diabetes, then it can be really challenging to get to a place where you feel like you're preventing the stress from being there in the first place. And what works are daily routines that help us with stress management. So journaling, meditation, walking, exercising, eating a whole foods diet, getting enough sleep, those are so important. And if those don't take care of the reduction in chronic stress, then seeing a therapist is really helpful. You can see a therapist because you're having stress. That's normal and that's okay. And learning new ways to think about your life so that it doesn't feel as heavy is huge and very evidence-based and very effective at helping people move past it. So understanding that preventing chronic stress is probably the best thing that we can do. Now, if you're someone who's having stress related to living with diabetes specifically, I've created an online course that puts together the mindset pieces that have really worked for me, what questions I asked myself, how I got to a place where I didn't feel so heavy. And that course is linked below in the description if you'd like to check it out. It's really made for the person who wants to feel better about living with diabetes and find ways to unlock how it's restricting us from feeling good. It's a self-paced 6-week course that you can do on your own, completely led by me. So if you're interested, please check that out or send me a question or leave a question in the comments. Thanks for listening to this. I hope you learned something great. I have another video on diabetes and lifestyle coming up here if you're interested in checking that out. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, that would be amazing. It helps me help more people. Thanks for sticking to the end, and I hope to see you next time.